Very warm welcome to another live Action for Happiness event. My name is Mark Williamson, and I'm so pleased to be welcoming you from all around the world to join us for this live community gathering, bringing people together from across the planet, trying to create a happier and kinder world as part of the Action for Happiness community. Today's theme is finding balance, and we're going to be exploring how we can really genuinely try and get a bit more balance in this frantic world and in our busy lives. And I'm really pleased to be joined today by Vishvapani, who is someone who's been inspiring me as a voice I hear regularly on Thought for the Day on the BBC. It's lovely to have you with us. Thanks for being here.
It's great to be here.
So if you're new to the Action for Happiness community, a very warm welcome. I hope you'll find this a nurturing and welcoming experience. And please do, as you'll see with others, join in the chat, keeping it kind and relevant, and also use the chance to use the Q&A function and ask your questions to Vishvapani, which we'll come to a bit later after we've had a conversation. There'll also be a chance for us all to participate, both in terms of interactive practices and also thinking about and reflecting on this really important question of how to find more balance in a world that so often feels rather unbalanced. And of course, if you're a regular, welcome back. Thank you so much for helping to make this such a special family of people all around the world who are trying to create a better, kinder way of living. Vishvapani, I'd love to start. I mean, you're a Buddhist teacher, you're an author, you're someone who thinks a lot about modern life and some of the challenges we face. For anyone who's not familiar with your work and way of thinking, I wondered if maybe you could give us a little introduction to you and particularly why this topic feels so important to you right now.
Okay, so as you say, I'm a Buddhist teacher. I'm also a mindfulness teacher. And I've been teaching Buddhism and practicing Buddhism since I was a teenager. Teaching not quite that long. And then I became a mindfulness teacher, which really took me out of that sort of little world of Buddhism and into something much more mainstream in society. And in all those ways, I just see how much stress and strain there is in our society. I think my Buddhist practice gives me a feeling of what balance is. And it also gives me a feeling of how nuts our society is. Things that we take for granted really are not the way that normal people should be living at all, in my view. So I think it's because our society is so out of balance that manifests as these states of stress and anxiety and all of those things we can feel. It's just become absolutely imperative that we find ways to rebalance. So hopefully that's what we'll be exploring tonight.
Yes, well, thank you. That's a really good, it already brings up so many questions, which I'd love us to dive into. But in the spirit of balance and also in your practice of mindfulness, I wondered if we could start actually with trying to bring ourselves back into a little bit more balance. Perhaps you could take us through a simple mindful practice to help us feel a bit more grounded as we begin this time together.
Yeah, absolutely. So, let's take it from that perspective of balance, and let's take it to start with that it's the end of the day, at least for those of us who are in the UK. We've had probably quite a lot of stimulation in the day. So what will help to come back to a sense of balance? So let's do one of these practices that mindfulness teachers like to lead. What we're going to do is take our awareness to the body and our breath in a way that is conducive to settling. But what I'm going to try and do is, rather than giving a set of instructions, I'm going to do this in a slightly more suggestive way by asking some questions. And because I think something like this is only really valuable if it's something we can put into practice in our lives. So let's just start by noticing how we're sitting or standing or however you are. And just ask the question, what way of sitting, of holding my body will be helpful if what I'm doing now is settling. So if you're scrunched up, you might want to unscrunch yourself, but use your intuitive sense of what will be helpful. What will help encourage a sense of feeling stable. So where will it now be helpful to direct our attention to encourage that sense of being stable? I'm going to make some suggestions, but I encourage you to, again, be intuitive and have a feeling of what's helpful for you. So one place you can put your attention is your feet on the floor. So really just sensing the contact, not thinking about it. The contact between your bottom, your thighs, and whatever you're sitting on. Just feeling the sensations there. So these might be helpful. It might be helpful to pay attention to the breathing. So as we do this, as we take our attention to something that feels settling, what do we notice in our experience? So again, I'll name a few things, but let's keep it as a question. What do we notice in our thinking? Are there lots of thoughts? In the body? What do we feel? How is the body right now? How about our emotions? How about how we're feeling internally? Not trying to change anything, we're just noticing. And then we'll come back to the question I asked earlier. If we're settling, where is it helpful to place our attention? And what's happening now? What do we notice? In our bodies, in our thoughts, in our feelings, in our energy. So as we settle, we could just bring to mind the question that is the theme of this evening, this session, which is balance. So just noticing what that word means, any associations, any thoughts around balance, particularly balance in your life. What that means to be in balance and ways that you notice you're out of balance. And we're not going to come up with lots of solutions in our mind. The mind will actually usually wants to do that, we'll just notice the areas that feel in balance, that feel out of balance. Just see what thoughts come to your mind. And coming towards the end of this practice now. So we're going to make a transition and finding our own way to do that. So maybe bringing in a little movement, moving your shoulders, your fingers, your toes. When you're ready, bringing the practice to a close.
Thank you, Vishvapani. I really, I feel more balanced myself. And I actually, having done lots of mindfulness practice, I actually really enjoyed that style you used of asking
Yeah.
us to sort of use a question rather than guiding us, inviting us to question and ask questions. I found that really helpful. And I see so lots of appreciation for you in the chat as well. But keeping that idea of questions alive, those of you who are regulars will know that we love to listen to you, the community here as well. So why don't we turn to this sort of central question, as Vishvapani was reminding us for today's event? What does balance mean to you? Maybe we could just hear from each other for a moment. Maybe you'd like to just share a few words in the chat about what balance means to you, and then I'll try and read a few of these out and we can use that during today's conversation. So, peace of mind, energy for life, feeling centered, feeling peaceful, equilibrium, equanimity, being in harmony, stable, tranquility, grounding myself, ease, balance between home and work and family and health, acceptance, keeping it together, feeling whole, harmonious, stability, control, boundaries, not feeling stressed, having balance with my time, not judging, able to breathe, oneness, and many more that I'm not able to read out. But even just those few give us a real sense of something quite profound, actually, don't they?
Yeah, well, it clearly means something to all of us. I mean, it's a metaphor, isn't it? A lot of these words we use, like being grounded, or they're sort of using something else to point towards something that we know intuitively. We feel we're like, the metaphor is, I don't know, there's something on a pivot and it goes out of balance. Or alternatively, there are two scales that need to be balanced. And I think that does speak to our lives, especially when it's not happening, especially when we're pushed in by circumstances or maybe even our psychology into something that really doesn't feel balanced.
Well, I was really struck in your introduction earlier that, of course, sometimes we feel about balance being something that we bring upon, or lack of balance being our own
Yes.
busyness. But actually, I felt in you, if I understood you rightly, that you sense that the modern environment is actually quite crazily more out of control and more sort of unconducive to balance than we even realize. It's almost like we've forgotten how much of a sort of busy, unbalanced world we're in. Is that how you feel about it?
Well, yeah, but yes, I do feel that. But I don't. Let's not have a long conversation about everything that's wrong with the world. The focus, if we're looking at this just from our individual point of view, I think we know when things don't feel right, and we can often we think, oh well, wouldn't it be nice to be more in harmony, more in balance, all that sort of thing. But we need, if we're going to get anywhere close to that, to be realistic about the forces that are at work on our minds. So this isn't politics. There's plenty of that going out there. But if we live in a world of smartphones, for example, just a fairly obvious example. So what does a smartphone do? It's fantastic because it's an endless source of stimulation, diversion, news, input, all that stuff, connection with other people. There's nothing wrong with any of those things. But what they become kind of addictive, and I must say, I feel this myself, and I have to be. My mind is quite easily becomes addicted to things, and I've had to really discipline myself with smartphone use. So I think when you're exposed to something like that, it quite quickly becomes normal. So you and I, Mark, are old enough to remember ancient history before 2009. That's only 2009 that the iPhone came in. And, we need to, if we want to be okay in and balanced, if that's going to mean anything at all for us, in a society that's pushing us out of balance by giving us this vast amount of stimulation, then we're going to need to notice what's happening and take some kind of initiative with how much stimulation we allow our minds to have. And I think there are a number of areas, in our culture, in our environment, that we need really to look at if we're going to have any chance of a balanced life. Yeah, it's not like I'll continue doing everything in the same old way, and then I'll do 5 minutes of meditation and I'm redressing the balance. No, that won't do it.
It's that you're reminding me of all these people who are obsessed with productivity in order to free up more time, and they find that the more productive they get, the more they just find things to do, and it actually becomes relentless.
Yeah,
But I
yeah,
think you said something really interesting there, which is before we come on to, as I hope we will, some solutions to achieve a bit more balance in our lives. I think you're really saying step one is to notice whether or not we're in balance and what are some of the things that affect our balance. Is that a
yeah,
good starting
that's
point?
right. I mean, I want to talk a sort of bit more generally about the forces in the culture, because
Mm,
I think if we load that all on me and my lifestyle, and we accept certain things as being normal, then uh, we probably won't manage it. And what then happens is we feel bad about ourselves.
yes.
We've got this goal of balance. We measure ourselves against the goal and we don't achieve it. So we end up feeling even worse. So, I mean, another example that I think we completely take for granted is the amount of advertising that we're exposed to. I mean, it's vast, and all of those things are giving us a message about something we should do, which is to buy products. I mean, this is, I don't know if that sounds like some kind of political statement. It really is just a statement of fact. It's a description of the culture we're in. So if we're in a culture that's exposing us to thousands and thousands of commercial messages every week, every month, then and we've stopped noticing that, then we need to notice, we need to start noticing and just ask the question, is this having an effect on me? Does it have an effect on how I see myself, what I think is valuable, my need for money, for example, because it's all part of it. And the alternative is to have, I think, a much simpler life, if we possibly can, as simple a life as we can have. We're in a culture that's telling us to have a more complicated life.
Well, I think that's incredibly wise, and I think you're right that many of these things that bombard us become almost like background noise, but they're having a
Yeah.
very important subconscious influence on us all the time. Another one that comes to mind for me, and again, I don't want to get into the news and culture and politics so much, but actually the fact that we have a media ecosystem which is generally choosing to accentuate bad and worrying and frightening
Yes,
news
yes,
rather
yes.
than positive and uplifting news, that has a real impact on our state of mind the whole time, it feels to me.
Yeah, I mean, just to be a little bit political for just a moment, the general mood seems to be mistrusting politicians, and there are plenty of statistics that show that trust in politicians has declined. Well, is that surprising? in a media environment which is really mainly interested in rubbishing them. Perhaps rubbishing your opponents, but in the end, it's everyone who's affected. So then we become cynical, then we withdraw. And I think that the important thing is to notice that we are participants in that we're affected by that. And the point of noticing, and really the point of mindfulness, is that we give ourselves more choice. A lot of what I find myself teaching as a mindfulness teacher is really very simple stuff. Feel your feet on the floor and so on. But we don't do those things because somehow we've lost the choice that will enable us to do it.
I know, and I'm already seeing in the chat that many people will be interested to think about, well, how can we then simplify our lives and find more
Yeah,
balance? But I want to just pause on that point
yeah,
about noticing. So obviously there's this influences on us, but I wonder if we could turn back to the community, Vishvapani, and ask
yeah, yeah.
everybody here, how do you notice if you're feeling out of balance? What are some of the
Mm.
ways in which we might draw this to our attention? And again, I'll just encourage anyone to share a few words in the chat. I'll read a few of these out, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts, Vishvapani, as well. So,
It's great having this input from everyone. I'm
yeah, it's lovely,
really,
isn't it? So people are
really
saying
feeling
anxiety, a
stimulated by it.
scribbly brain. That's a wonderful description.
Scribbly
Physical
brain, good
pain,
one.
headaches, overwhelm, feeling jittery, overeating, holding my breath. Yes, I certainly do that. Depression, tension, burnout, feeling tired, detached, irritable, numb.
Yeah,
Critical of
yeah,
others, feeling hopeless, brain fog, having difficult thoughts, neck pain, anger, intense emotions. Wow, this is, yeah, I can relate to lots of these.
yeah,
How are you
yeah,
feeling as you see that list?
yeah, yeah. I'm seeing them coming up in the chat. It's a bit much, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah. I think. All right, and it's also worth noticing what happens when we get into those states. We very often blame ourselves for it. And of course, it's important to take responsibility for not getting too grumpy or irritable or whatever it might be. But when we blame ourselves, we stop looking at the conditions that we're there in our lives that are going to enable us to not be out of balance in that kind of way. And that really means, so it means looking at the conditions, also means looking at our minds. And I think once we start to get into some of the territory that those comments are describing of things like depression and anxiety, it's really important to start to look at what happens in our minds. And it's not so easy. That's what mindfulness is about, really. It's not about coloring books. It's about knowing what's happening in your mind,
Mm.
most importantly.
And just to really emphasize the point you made there, because I found myself feeling a bit overwhelmed seeing all of that. Real, I guess suffering is not quite the right word, but there's a lot of trauma we go through in this feeling out
Yes,
of balance. And I'm
yes,
really grateful to everyone
absolutely.
who's been so honest to share that with us. But the point a therapist once said to me when I was talking about something I'd been through, they just really, I felt heard because they said, that makes complete sense. It's understandable you would feel
Yes,
that way. And I think the
yes,
combination of things you said, like the world is busy and we're under all this pressure, it's completely understandable that we would feel burnt out and tired and anxious and irritable. And
yeah,
it's kind of although we can take responsibility, it's not our fault as well. And I think there's an element of
yes.
self-compassion that we need here as well.
Yeah, and that can be confusing, can't it? Take responsibility, but it's not my fault. So I think the fault means there's basically something wrong with me. I am just this bad kind of person who gets into all this stuff, or this failure, this loser, all that stuff. And the problem with those sorts of judgments is that one problem is that it's painful, but another problem is it stops us looking at what is actually causing it, and they're very often things that we can do something about. I mean, we can't do something about everything. We can't, I sometimes work with people in a lot of chronic pain. So you can't change that, but there almost always is something you can change in maybe our response to that, our attitude.
I like that thing about you may not change what the situation, but you can choose
Yeah.
a response. It reminds me of Viktor Frankl's amazing book about man's search for meaning, and actually some of the examples we've
Yeah.
given about the advertising culture and the media culture. We can opt out of some of those things or choose to have less of it in our lives, even though it is quite pervasive. And even with pain, I know people who've had chronic pain, Vishvapani, who've said the pain is still there, but my response to it and the relationship I have with it has been changed
Yeah.
through practices like mindfulness, for example.
Yeah. 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 I think it's worth, what the advertising, just to go back to that, and um, apps, they're designed to diminish our choice. All those subliminal messages to our unconscious minds, or things that are designed to be addictive, they disempower us.
Mm.
Now, it might be that we really enjoy doing some of those things, and that's great. But it's what I think is important is that we regain the capacity to choose. And that I'm just thinking about this more and more, how we lose it through the environment and what it gives us.
Well, let's come on then to
Yeah.
some of your insights from mindfulness and also this whole topic of balance and all the thinking you've done on this.
Yeah.
So, step one, it sounds like, is to just be a bit more aware of these influences and the effect it's
Mm.
having on us. But how you talked about, for example, simplifying our lives. If there's someone here today who's feeling a bit out of balance, where would we start?
Um, I think I do think a lot of it is about noticing and having the choice. And I feel a little bit reluctant to sit here and give self-help advice.
Mm.
You know, I'm much, and a list of things to do. I mean, look, this is an action for happiness Zoom. I'm actually, as it happens, and this is not me ingratiating myself, I am an admirer of the action for happiness approach because it names quite a number of different areas of life. Sometimes I find myself as a mindfulness teacher going into a situation where people have got huge problems and all I've got to offer is mindfulness, or all I'm being asked to offer is mindfulness. And I increasingly feel unhappy doing that because I don't think any one approach is enough. And I think so it's good to have a balanced approach. But actually, we had a preliminary conversation before this, and I said that to you. And you made the point, Mark, that it's good to have lots of areas of where you can take the initiative, but it can feel rather busy, right? And that is one of the things about self-help type approaches or positive psychology approaches. It gives you lots of things to do, but mate, you've already got a big things to do list, and now you've got to do your gratitude journal, and now you've got to do your mindfulness practice and all. So I think one of the areas of balance is not being in what we sometimes call doing mode all the time. And we can throw in lots of good ideas. It's all right to do nothing, to consider the lilies of the field, smell the coffee, all that sort of stuff. It's all right. So we can find ourselves out of balance by being overly active. And then what we need to bring in is the opportunity to be receptive, even to be passive, to notice and be curious. So, I mean, for me, that's what the mindfulness is doing. That it's giving ourselves the space to step out of being busy, and then I think the choices come more naturally.
I really appreciate your sort of humility in not wanting to give out sort of general as advice because I think part of
Yeah,
the point here is it's a personal thing and we have different circumstances and personality types and so
yeah,
on. But what you just said really resonated with me personally in that I woke up this morning with a very long to-do list and feeling a real
yeah,
sense of pressure. And I came to the kitchen and looked out and saw there was sunshine outside and I thought instead of getting caught up in this cycle of overwhelm, I just grabbed a cup of tea and went and sat in the garden and did a breathing exercise and looked at the sky and took maybe 5 minutes to just be in nature and take a breath. And it's weird in that was giving up some of this time in my busy day, and yet somehow everything seemed to flow a bit more calmly and smoothly, and I was able to choose what to focus on and what to let go of and what to say yes to and who to politely decline, etc., with a bit more clarity. And it was almost as if it reminded me of that funny quote that says you should meditate for 15 minutes a day except for busy days when you should do half an hour, which of course is, the irony is
Yeah.
that sometimes
Yeah.
creating more quiet time gives us more space in a way.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, and also what you described just then, I mean, in a way, that's the most natural thing in the world to do. And how strange it is that we're somehow in a position where we don't have time, we think we don't have time for just a few minutes of looking at the sun and the sky and drinking a cup of tea and actually tasting it. I was just thinking about the going back to the culture. I've been reflecting that when I was a kid, I wasn't brought up a Christian, but Sundays were quiet days. It was the Sabbath, and they still are for some people. And I think that what that shows is a sort of a need for a natural rhythm in the week. There's a quiet part, 6 days shall you labor, and then the seventh day you rest. That was God, wasn't it? But that applies to the rest of us. And I think it's one of the reasons I don't want to give self-help advice is I think really that the most important guide that we have is our own intuition about what's right for us and knowing when we're out of balance. And so I think this finding the rhythm that that suits us, that supports a sense of balance, can only come intuitively. I mean, actually, in a way, it's easier if the whole culture says, right, it's Sunday, everything's closed, which is what it's like when I was a kid.
Yeah, and I look back quite fondly on those days because
Yeah.
I certainly remember that idea of a real down day, and I've tried to create that to some extent for our children. But even their Sundays are full of football club and other
Yeah,
things.
yeah,
And it
yeah.
does still feel a bit relentless. But I'd love us to, well, in a moment, talk a bit more about how we can build sort of helpful habits in general
Yes. Okay.
in an unbalanced world. But just I think in the same way I shared something personal, I'd love to hear although you may not want to give us all general advice, what are some things you find helpful in your own life, Vishvapani, that help you both have that awareness, but also then
Yeah.
maybe respond in a more helpful way to these stimuluses and prompts from the culture that we get all the time?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, the main thing is a meditation practice, which means that because it's part of my life now, I have time where it's not that you're just receptive. That tends to be what we focus on with mindfulness-based approaches to meditation. Meditation can be active, but what it's doing is it's taking you into a deeper aspect of your experience in your life. And so that's another area of imbalance, that we tend to be too much on the surface. And there's all sorts of things going on in the depths, which, sometimes come out of the depths and drive us mad. So I think time to contact the depths. I mean, I like reading. I read poetry, time in nature, all of those things. They're important. I mean, gardening, they're important because they help me to access different aspects of who I am. And then there are things that I do. I was talking about smartphones. I have curfews. I have no phone zones. I've deleted all sorts of apps that I thought that Scrabble. I got obsessed by Scrabble. No, I mean, I know it's not heroin or crack cocaine, but the mind can do that. My mind can do it anyway.
Tell
So
me
it's
about a
not
no phone zone. I know about people turning off their phone at certain times of day. Is that a particular area, like in your house or your work, where you don't allow yourself to use
the
the device?
bedroom, the
Yeah.
toilet.
No bedroom, no toilet. That sounds very wise.
Yeah.
Let's talk. I mean, that's lovely examples. Thank you. And I'm sure others in the community will have their own versions of that. But part of what's going on here is, you've built a helpful habit there
Yeah.
around not taking your phone into your bedroom, for example. One of the things I've learned with Action for Happiness is we are creatures of habit, and that's wonderful. And it
Yes.
allows us to
Yes.
survive, but it's also really hard, or can be difficult, to change a habit of a lifetime or indeed build a new helpful habit. Have you had any insights about, maybe through mindfulness, how we can be sort of change our behavior in a way that sort of lasts?
Mm. Um, well, I'm interested in your experience, Mark. Like, are there any things that you have been successful? I think it's helpful to think of the things that we've done that have been successful, and we've embedded them in our lives, and things that we've done which we probably all have a long list. I was going to learn Spanish. I was going to, etc. of things we never got round to, and to ask what the difference is between those two.
Well, let me give you some examples. So I
Yeah.
found that trying a sort of mantra-based sort of
Yeah.
idea that sometimes comes up in popular culture, I didn't find helpful. I found it felt a bit inauthentic.
Yeah.
I found the idea of turning my to-do list into a to-be list, which had more of those sort of
Oh,
values
that's
of who
nice.
I wanted to be. Like today, I'm going to be kind or grateful, rather than I'm going to go to this meeting. That really lasted and became part of my daily routine. So I'm not sure there's any general lesson I can draw from there, but I really love your point there, which is we can sort of be like a little scientist in our own lives, try something out with that mindful awareness
Yeah.
and think, oh, that didn't work. I wonder why. Oh, that has worked. That's interesting. And sort of learn from our
Yeah.
own,
Yeah.
as you say, intuition.
I suspect that one of the factors is that it's got to feel important to you. I mean, I think I started meditating when I was a teenager. I mean, none of my other actually I did bring some of my friends along to the place where I was learning meditation, but none of them stuck with it. And I think that's because, well, frankly, they were interested in other things. I happened to be a slightly odd kind of teenager who was interested in that. And probably that was to do with a sort of underlying set of values that I had. So I think that we tend to sustain things when we really feel that they're important. Um, and I think reflecting, taking time to reflect on what is important to me, that is that means that we stick with the activities that then become a habit. And it's really helpful when they come to habit, because then you can't be making these choices all the time.
Well, that's making me think of something you hinted at a moment
Yeah.
ago, which was about this idea of something deeper beneath the surface. Because,
Yes.
I don't want to get, I mean, I come from a religious background, but I'm not someone with a practicing faith right now. But I
Yeah.
do continue to have a sort of sense of a connection to something larger than just myself, something slightly mysterious, something about the kind of the beauty in all life and the complexity of the universe. And there's something about I mean, I don't want to get too deep and meaningful, but it feels like there's something more meaningful beneath it all than this
Yeah.
day-to-day busyness that we have. And actually tapping into that and sort of saying, what is my purpose? Why am I here? What's going on? Why does any of this matter? Rather than finding that overwhelming, I find that quite calming. And actually, if I can tune into it, I then make more wise decisions about what's the right
Yeah.
thing to do with my family right now, or the right thing to do in this, letting go of the noise and focusing on what really matters. Do you find that's a
Yeah.
helpful
Yeah, I
blend?
do. I also find it helps to reflect, and this might not feel very upbeat, but that I'm mortal. My time is limited. I'm about to turn 60, you know, but we're all about to turn something or other, aren't we? I think reflections like that really focus me on, well, they need to go with something else, which is that this life that we have is amazing and unique and an incredible opportunity. These are traditional Buddhist reflections, and also really understanding, and this is a big source of reflection, that our actions in the past have created who we are now. Our choices and other things that have happened to us have brought us to this point. And what that means is the choices we make now will shape our future. So those are kind of traditional reflections in a Buddhist context, but I think they're quite universal. And, when you really feel life is short, life is precious, and I have agency, then those choices become important. It's really important to wake up to what's going on in our lives. It won't come round again.
I really love that idea of waking up. It's a phrase I've been using a lot, and I feel like I
Ah,
had a radical wake up in my own life when I was in a very stressed sort of corporate,
okay,
high power but deeply
right.
meaningless and stressful experience, and have ended up doing this partly as a
What
response to
happened,
that
Mark?
waking up. Oh well, in my case, it was a sort of trying to follow other people's expectations, running really fast up a ladder of
Yeah,
career success and academic success, and then one day looking up and thinking, why am I going up this ladder? I don't care about any of this stuff. I want to do something meaningful. And it actually manifested for me in chronic pain, in back pain, and it was sort
right.
of, that was
Okay.
my wake up. And I know lots of other people have had different kind of, oh my goodness, this is not the stuff that really matters in life. I need to change direction. So it
Yeah,
came to
yeah.
me back to something you said to me actually, Vishvapani, which was about like, what is your why, or
What
something
is your
along those
why? Yeah.
lines. And I really love that question. And I think my why became how, or, well,
Mm,
the reason that I want to continue doing things in the world is like,
yeah.
how can I help create more happiness in the world and less unhappiness? And that's become, of course, the pledge of Action for Happiness. And that is a
Yeah.
personal thing to some extent, but it's also a pro-social aim. And it's helped me have a bit more balance, like let
Yeah.
go of things I might have been chasing, material things or recognition, and focus more on relationships or the natural world or moments of peace. Now I'm far from
Yeah.
perfect, and I still have my moments of stress and
Of
anger and
course.
unhappiness,
Of course.
as we all do. But I like that question of what's the why behind your balance.
Well, okay. So just to reflect back, what I'm hearing you saying is you a lot of it was to do with what other people thought, or
Yes.
it was sort of externally focused, these validating things like success and money and status and all of those things. And then that you, I mean, it was unpleasant, but there was a wake up call, which was your back. I think that very often is the way it is. I mean, it's unfortunate that we have to hit that point of crisis and suffering. But that's telling us that we're out of balance. We're out of balance and we're out of touch with our real values. And yeah, and then finding what those values are. What is it that actually feels worthwhile and important in my life?
Well, can we just? I love that question so
Okay.
much. Can we turn back to our lovely community and
Yes,
say,
yes.
what is it that feels meaningful, important in your life, wherever you are in the world right now? What is it that's behind your desire for balance and your desire, the actions you take? What's the underlying sort of meaning, purpose, fulfillment that really matters to you? And I'm just going to again invite people to share a few words, and I'll read some of these out. So,
Hmm.
connection, showing love, care, inner peace, hope, taking less and giving more, feeling stable, doing the right thing, community, service, family, friends, kids, serenity, kindness, authenticity, relationships, love, being true to myself, connections with others and the world, joy in the little moments,
Yeah,
compassion,
yeah, yeah.
giving love. This is really
Yeah.
moving. I find this really
It
emotional.
is,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. And maybe quite strong experiences that, to learn these things that people are putting in, we probably need to go through a certain amount of suffering. Um, but yes, it is moving to see these, what everyone's saying.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And as ever, tomorrow we'll send around a link to the video of this conversation, including a link to the chat file where you can reflect back on all these wonderful things that you've all shared. together. And we'll also send a link to Vishvapani's
Yeah,
website. And I know you have sort of mindfulness trainings and information and other things that people
all
can
that stuff.
follow up on. I'm going to suggest now we come to the questions from you in the audience. So if you have a question that you'd like to put to Vishvapani, please do use the Q&A. And if you see one you like, give it a little thumbs up and it will jump up the list. And we'll try and come to some of the more popular questions. And so I'm going to start with a question from someone called T that just says, what simple ideas can we put into practice to try and maintain a balance, particularly in a busy everyday life? So I guess a lot of us are feeling this sort
Yeah.
of sense of just too much to do. Any suggestions?
I think pausing in the day. I think we need to recognize that the way our minds work is we get on a roll with things build up, and we need to build in like fire breaks. So really, we have to pause. People used to have lunch breaks, don't seem to happen anymore, but we've got to pause and we've got to use that time to just stop. You don't really have to do very much. Just stop is probably enough.
I really like that fire break idea. Now, Clifford, who is a regular here, thanks for being here again, Clifford, has asked a question which sounds similar, but I wonder if it goes slightly deeper. It just sort of says, how do we find balance when life is chaos, like you're tightrope walking in a hurricane? So I think it's a bit
Yeah.
like the previous question, but for some people, it's not like when life's busy, we're actually out of control. And maybe what we need to do is reach out for help in some way or start with a bit of a major change before we're able to just pause. What do you think about that?
Well, I think I'd want to know what that chaos means for that person, because sometimes it's chaos around us and sometimes it's chaos inside ourselves. But yeah, I don't know. I'm very reluctant to give general suggestions for someone like that. I think the main thing I'd say is you need to take it seriously. You know, it's important that um, you find a way to be okay when things are
Mm.
chaotic.
It's the most important thing in a way, isn't it?
It's the
So I think
most
allowing
important
ourselves
thing.
to say
Yeah,
this is worth prioritizing is
yeah.
really is a big first step. Thank you.
And also maybe recognizing that we probably won't think about that, because when there's everything's going crazy, our attention is all out there on the craziness, and that won't be enough. We need to come back to ourselves. So I
Mm,
mean, whoever that was, if your life is crazy and you're tuning into this Zoom with Action for Happiness, good for you, because most people wouldn't.
well said. Thank you. Ruth says, "How do I find my why?" Back to that
How do I
conversation
find
we
my
was
why?
having. It feels quite overwhelming to try and
Right.
figure that out. Well, thank you, Ruth, for being so honest. It is a big question. What are your thoughts?
Um, I think maybe the question is too big and we need to break it down into something more manageable and smaller. It's like, what are my values in life? Why am I here? What should I do with my life? I mean, you're never going to be able to answer those questions. But what feels meaningful to me? You know, what relationships, what activities, uh and what really doesn't. And I think very often we need to just withdraw from the things that aren't out and tune with our values. I don't know. It's going to be an exploration.
Mm. Thank you. Jules said, I'm interested in your example about chronic pain. As someone
Ah,
who lives with chronic pain, can
yeah.
you expand on what you can do to help with this? Well, I've obviously got some personal reflections on that, but,
Mm.
over to you first. What do you think about pain?
Well, so one language that is quite I find quite helpful is we can think about primary suffering and secondary suffering. So the primary suffering is the physical experience of pain. Um, and then there's all of the other things that we pile on top of that. So all the catastrophizing, the despair, the blame, the all that stuff. Uh, what we can do is, I think we need to really start exploring that and finding resources. I mean, mindfulness actually is very helpful in that sort of situation, so that we can often what's there physically is more manageable, certainly more manageable than when it's bundled together with everything else. So it's about finding what we can stop putting our energy into, and then we can often manage more with what's there.
Thank you. Well, I'd certainly agree. There's lots of great mindfulness resources around
Yeah.
managing pain, and Breathworks is an organisation we've done some work with before that have specific courses on mindfulness and pain. But there were many other good ones. And the thing
Yeah,
I
well, I'm a
found personally with
breathworks
my back
teacher.
pain.
Brilliant stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So with my own back pain, I found that one of the things that made a huge difference was the fear I had associated with it. Pain is, of course, a kind of
Um,
neural pathway connection, and it's a very real thing, but it's at least in part driven by an expectation or a sort of
yes.
a wired-in sort of response that you're almost anticipating. And when I was really scared that I was damaging my back, the
Mm,
pain was excruciating. But when I learned that some of my back pain was caused by stress and tension and muscle pain and wasn't me damaging myself in the long-term way,
right.
that dissipation of the fear also allowed the pain to dissipate. And it was really a really interesting experience to notice that the expectations we have around pain, the signals it's sending us, and it changed the relationship we have with it. So I think being able to let go of the fear of
Yeah.
pain was completely life-changing for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And then sometimes we can start to notice the other things that are there in our life, even along with the pain.
Exactly.
So the pain may not go away, but it's not everything. So we become a bit bigger than we feel otherwise. But I again, I feel reluctant sort of saying that, because if anyone's listening to this and they really are in pain, it can seem unkind to say, well, as if it's saying, as if it's dismissing that. So it's a process we've got to go through in exploring our experience to come to terms with really difficult things.
I
And we
completely
can't just
agree.
jump to the end and say, we end up in a kind of denial if we do
Yeah.
that.
There's no one size fits all, and there's no sort of simple solution. Requires a sort of personalized approach to whatever's going on in our situation and our particular sort of circumstances. But I
Yes,
want
I mean,
to
I'm quite keen thinking that mindfulness, for example, is not a technique. It's actually something to do with being alive. This
mm,
crazy life that we all have, which only lasts for a certain length of time, and you know, we're in relationship with other people. It's about inhabiting that in a way that is aware and intelligent.
I really
Okay,
like
let's
that.
have
It's
some
a
more
very
questions.
nice,
I
it's
like
kind of
these
a
questions.
radical way of thinking about mindfulness as a sort of way of being rather than a practice. I think that's nice. Um,
Yeah, well,
Laura has asked a question which is very close to my heart, and I'm sure many others here. She says, I'm particularly worried about our youth and young children being out of balance. They're
right.
experiencing a world which is 24/7 news,
Yeah,
notification, text, ads, all the things you said earlier, but I think
yeah,
probably on steroids, really. What
yeah.
can adults and parents and carers and others that care about young people do to help?
Yeah, good question. I think I have a teenage son, and I see this. I mean, I think he's okay. I think he's great. But yeah, what he's exposed to is not, yeah, it is worrying. I share that. Um, I think probably we should start with ourselves, and with our children. I think the best thing we can do is offer an example of a balanced life. Being loving towards them, being stable, being present, being interested in them, and um, young people do to some extent follow what we do. So I think that's one area where we can have agency. And then there's endless arguments about how much they use their phone and playing games and stuff. And I don't know what the solution to those things is. But I do think there are things we can do in terms of just how we are ourselves.
Yeah, I find my own kids hold up a mirror to me, and every time I feel frustrated about their behavior with a device or their distraction, I have to see that there's an element of me in that as well. I think
Yeah,
with all these things,
totally.
we're trying to navigate a new phase of the human condition in the same way as when the car came along, people didn't quite know how to manage the car safely. This new technology has come along, and we haven't quite worked out the boundaries and social etiquette and healthy way of responding to it. But I think we will get there with a bit of mindfulness and a bit of compassion and a bit of tolerance, and but also this just awareness that we need to let go sometimes for our own good. And I see that in my own kids actually saying things like, "Dad, I'm just going to leave my phone at home this weekend," and I'm like, I didn't even suggest that. They thought of that themselves, and it was like a really lovely experience to see that. Rarely when it happens,
Yeah.
but um, Vishvapani, thank you so much. We're running out of time, and I want to turn back to you for a final thought in a moment. But before we do that, I'd love to invite you and everyone here to join me in something we call the checkout at the end of these Action for Happiness
Okay.
gatherings. And it's got three parts to it. So the first part is if we all just, as you encouraged us to do at the start, take a moment to pause and take a breath and just notice how we're feeling now, having spent this really rich and meaningful time together, and all the ideas and thoughts and insights that we've heard and shared. And so, wherever you are in the world right now, just notice how you're feeling and that hopeful sense of a little bit more mindfulness and balance inside of you right now. And let's bring our attention to something we've appreciated about this time, maybe an idea that Vishvapani has shared with us, or a kind word or concept you've seen shared by somebody else in this community, or just a new insight about your own life, your own priorities, your own behavior that may be helpful as we part today. And holding in mind that appreciation, the final part of this checkout is to recognize how lucky we are, not only to have this precious life that Vishvapani reminded us of, but that we can be here to think about these things, to spend time noticing what matters, and to find a bit more balance in a world which really is not only out of balance, but in which so many people are suffering and don't have the chance to join something like this today. So let's send out some love and well-wishing to places in the world and to people in the world who could do with more of these ideas in their lives right now, in the challenges they face, to places that need more balance in the world. Thank you. Vishvapani, maybe you'd like to leave us with a final thought as we wrap up.
Yeah, I think I said balance is a metaphor. It's an image. Um, just my suggestion is we just reflect on what images, what pictures, what natural form suggests balance to us. And maybe I've been really encouraging everyone to use their intuition in the faith that we actually know what balance feels like. And an image can help us, like a tree, a mountain, or something like that, that can help us really stay in touch with that sense of balance. If things are chaotic, someone asked, how can I be a mountain in the middle of the chaos? How can I be a sturdy oak tree, even if the wind is blowing?
That's a lovely final thought. Thank you. I'm really grateful for your time, for your insights. I look forward to hearing your wise words on Radio 4 again soon. But thank you for being with us today. And thank you to everyone who's participated for your wise thoughts, your great questions, your kindness to each other. And thanks for being part of the Action for Happiness community. Vishwapani, hopefully see you again soon. And thanks again, everyone.